You're watching Left, Right and Centre. Next up on the programme, we continue to track the arguments in the Supreme Court on same-sex marriage. The observations of the Chief Justice, very important. One of his remarks, we see same-sex relationships not just as physical relations but something more of a stable emotional relationship. He later asks whether it is time to redefine the evolving nature of marriage. Do marriages need to be defined by a binary gender? In other words, that they are male and female. Can same-sex marriages actually take place in India in the future? That's what the Supreme Court will pass its judgment on. That will take perhaps a few more months, but one way or the other it's going to be a landmark judgment. Also interesting is that this is one of the cases in the Supreme Court which is being broadcast live, so you can actually listen in over here to the lawyers arguing and the Chief Justice speaking as well, making a lot of the remarks, or many of the remarks I've just referred to.
You are really asking us to read into the statute the expression spouses for really man and woman.
So does the underlying thrust of SMA exclude your lordship's reading or insertion or understanding of that construct? Is the
because your principal premise is that when the legislation was enacted in 1954,
yes,
the object of the legislation was to provide a form of matrimony for people who are not falling back on their personal law of marriage.
Absolutely.
Right? And
Special categories.
You are giving Parliament was intending to provide an avenue to people beyond your religious, the religious governance of marriage, so to speak.
Yeah. There was also an aspect of endogamy.
Yeah.
Yes. There was an aspect of endogamy which we cannot ignore.
Yes.
So it was an all-enfolding kind of a legislation.
And it cut across so many spectrum because it was intended to be a very special category.
After 1954, in the last 46 and 69 years, our law has really evolved to recognize the fact when you decriminalize homosexuality, you also realize, well, these are not just one-off relationships. This also comprehends a stable relationship.
Because you go back and say,
by decriminalizing homosexuality, we have not just recognized fleeting relationships between consenting adults of the same gender, right? We have also recognized implicitly, therefore, the fact that people who are of the same sex would be in stable relationships. Now, the object of the law in 1954 was to bring in its fold people who would be governed by a matrimonial relationship apart from their personal law. And surely that law is capable of being broadly read according to you, so as to take into account more stable relationships.
Let me put it bluntly.
The same sex as well.
Let me put it bluntly. When you enacted the law, you did not, in the debate in Parliament, in the writing of the draftsman, when I get up and speak on it, may not have got homosexuals in mind. You may not have considered them.
That makes no difference.
The way which you are perhaps propounding is, this provided a framework, but that framework is of the concept of marriage. The concept of marriage transcends contemporary understanding to
it's an evolving dynamic concept.
To comprehend an evolving idea of
dynamic, very dynamic.
Looking at India constitutionally and socially as well,
yes,
we have already reached the intermediate stage, right? The intermediate stage postulates that by decriminalizing homosexuality, your very act of decriminalizing homosexuality does contemplate that therefore people who belong to the same sex would be in stable marriage-like relationships.
Marriage-like is the operative word.
Right, marriage-like relationships.
Live together.
Because the moment we have said that it's no longer an offence under section 377, therefore we necessarily contemplate that you could have a stable marriage-like relationship between two persons who do not treat these as chance encounters, but as something more than that, not just a physical relationship, but something more of a stable emotional relationship, right?
Societal.
Which now is an incident of our constitutional interpretation.
All right, well, joining us now, we've got a great panel. Rishikesh Satavane joins us, as does Zainab Patel. Zainab is a petitioner in this case.
Open.
Let me just go straight across to Zainab first. And you know, this is what I found really interesting. What the Chief Justice actually said, and it's so refreshing to actually hear it, not just read about it, because it's been broadcast live, is his interpretation of the law on decriminalizing 377. It isn't just restricted to decriminalizing gay sex, it's actually a lot more. And what he said, and I quote, by decriminalizing homosexuality, We have not just recognized treating relationships between consenting adults of the same gender, we've also recognized that people who are of the same sex would even be in stable relationships. How important of an observation, Zainab, is that?
Thank you for this question. I think if you look at a fundamental issue over here, and I'm not talking from a right spectrum, I'm just talking about just as an average human being, LGBTIQ plus people just have the same kind of aspiration in terms of being in a loving, committed relationship where you have a companion for life who will support you to the ups and downs. And it is, we achieved a landmark with decriminalization, but realization of our full rights and responsibilities in a spectrum has to come up with this kind of a case. As an honest, tax-paying citizen of this country, we cannot be exiled to live a life of a second-class citizen. And I think full enjoyment of right, just like any other citizen. एक आम आदमी की भांति मुझे भी वही अधिकार है जो समाज ने अब तक हमसे दूर रखा. So I think we've been excluded from processes and still being told that it's okay to be a second-class citizen as long as you are decriminalized. So I think the idea about us going to court and all of us petitioners going to court, putting our privacy, putting our lives in the front of so many people, millions of Indians looking at the proceedings of the Supreme Court, is
right.
Just to send out a beacon that we are here, we are visible, and what you are seeing in front of you is not a demand for a special right, it is a demand for equal right.
Sure. Rishikesh, let me come to you next. Another quote from the Chief Justice. And we hasten to add that these are observations and not the judgment. So the judgment can be something completely different, but perhaps it's moving in the right direction in terms of rights in this country. But Rishikesh just referred to this. In the last 69 years, our law has really evolved. When you decriminalize homosexuality, you also realize that these are not one-off relationships. These are also stable relationships. Speaking about this is just another relationship. It doesn't really matter if people of the same sex, it's a relationship and it could be stable. This actually places it in the path towards recognizing that same-sex marriages, can be a reality and it wouldn't be any different in a profound way.
So in my perspective, marriage is between two souls. Our law a long time ago, or at least our morality said, you cannot do intercaste, you cannot do interreligion marriage. And, after a period of time, you realize, this is all just, some fundamentalists or people who are afraid or are not knowledgeable enough. They're just creating these barriers, that those barriers have no basis. And the barrier to same-sex marriage is the similar barrier. That 10 years or 20 years from now, people will say, why was it even bad? This is not really a problem in my perspective. Two people wanting to live their life together is nobody else's business as long as they are being positive and contributing members of the society. That's all that is important. There is no criminal element in two people getting married of same sex.
The lack of the law didn't prevent you from getting married, right? But you can do it. You can do it now legally, hopefully, with a piece of paper in a couple of months. If the verdict goes your way, we don't know. But you never stopped, right? The law didn't stop you or your partner.
I hope so. I got married with my now husband more than 5 years ago in India in a religious ceremony. Fortunately, our law was ambiguous, so nobody could come and arrest me. But I had, lawyers on my call just in case something happens. Then, fortunately, after the wedding ceremony, I didn't really have time to go to the court and get it legalized. It's just not my cup of tea. I came back to California.
So, would there be another big wedding party if this actually does happen legally, same-sex marriage?
I'm not so sure because my husband already said, half a day wedding is already too long.
All right. Shashank Shekhar Jha, Shashank, what again, these are just observations, not a judgment, but I think the observations are important because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justice Chandrachud also worked on section 377 and the reading down of 377. This being the case, if he is interpreting this same judgment, right, as sort of paving the path towards stable relationships among same-sex members, is it not an important statement that he's making today? Because it seems to suggest that, look, if we've gone so far, then same-sex marriages are perhaps the next step.
Namaste Vishnuji and every other fellow panelists here. Vishnuji, I think that was very wrong on part of Honorable CGI, with due regards and respect to the bench of Supreme Court. But I don't think Supreme Court, or for that one CGI, can interpret our statutory provisions in any manner in which they want to. As far as the CGI statement is concerned, I will quote. He says that we have never seen ourselves as bound by the original interpretation of the Constitution, so then should be bound by the original interpretation of a statute, unquote. So I think that if CGI is making such an oral observation while saying that they will not think about anything as to with regards to the interpretation or the original consent of the Parliament, for that point they will also overlook all the aspects for which this particular act was brought upon. I think that is worrisome. Also because of the fact that then there will be a very there is a very minute difference between the separation of power of Parliament and judiciary. If judiciary will take such calls, then what is our parliaments are for?
No, but I think the point that he was making when he was talking about statutes is that interpretation of those statutes is evolving, just as the interpretation of relationships is clearly evolving. Our laws have changed over 60 odd, or 70 odd, 69 years, right? The interpretations have changed as well, right? Society is not static, society evolves. We are not based on the past, we are based on the present and hopefully looking at the future. I think that's what he was referring to.
Vishnuji, the only point of difference I have here is that earlier we used to criticize bureaucrats because they used to be inside the AC rooms, chambers without going on ground. And
but they're still there, by the way, but carry on.
No. But then they used to speak for behalf of country without going on ground. Now, judiciary is doing the same thing. With due respect to Supreme Court of India, they are doing the same thing because this is the duty of Parliament, because they actually represent people of India, and Constitution is very clear as far as the powers of Parliament and judiciary. So
Okay.
if judiciary will try to do what Parliament is supposed to do, I guess that will be worrisome.
Okay. Paras Tomar, the Chief Justice observes, it requires us to redefine the evolving notion of marriage, because is the existence of two spouses who belong to a binary gender a necessary requirement for a marriage? It's the most basic question, right?
I think when they're talking about the fact that there will be a requirement to redefine these relationships, my response to that is sure, if there's a requirement, we will do it. Because, I love the fact that today one of the arguments that was made was about, because everyone is saying, how are these people going to procreate, right? But I love the fact that today there was an argument made, but what about people who want to marry after their 50s? A lot of women who may not be in the age to procreate anymore are still allowed to get married. That means they cannot actually have a biological child. There are also lots of couples who are choosing to be childless today. But what's happening in this discussion is I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that the conventional setup of a marriage or a couple that we thought of as a man and woman is perhaps changing. And the argument when they say we have to rethink all of it, my response to all of that is sure, let's rethink it, because it's important that we actually do that. The other question a lot of people ask me, and I also like the fact that as someone who's very active on social media, a lot of our conversation also is with people from small towns who actually don't know any better and are curious. The one thing, Vishnu, everyone actually asked me was, they said, Paras Bhaiya, if tomorrow two guys get married, if you get married to a guy, husband kaun hai and wife kaun hai? You have to understand, a lot of people asking these questions sometimes is not with malice or the intent to hurt you. Sometimes it's really coming from the perspective of them not knowing. And my response to most people is, that's where that whole funda begins to change, because today we're looking at these relationships as not between a man and a woman. It's about two people who could be whichever gender. The binary and the not binary, notwithstanding. For me, the biggest struggle right now is when I wanted to have a baby. I was talking about the fact that about a month or 2 months ago, I said I'm actually looking for a lesbian couple, or I was looking for a girl who might identify as being a lesbian, who probably wants to co-parent with me, Vishnu, and to have a child, which means that we live our own individual lives. I personally think we're ready for these kind of new commitment. I remember putting out a whole video and a whole bunch of people wrote to me and say, hey, we're rich, we have so much money, so that means we don't want to get married to you at all. We don't want to have a child with you because we want the money. But I feel India is changing a lot. So when people say we'll have to redefine these relationships, my response is, karo, achhi baat hai. The redefinition is a good thing. Like you said, society is not static. Time for us to move.
Priyanka, I think in this, Paras just mentioned the word gender. But is it not true that in this entire debate, the words sex and gender are being used interchangeably when people don't understand that they're very different? Sex is male or female. That is a biological construct. However, gender is man and woman, and that's entirely fluid. It's a question of identification. And therefore, when people talk about male and female in strict terms, biological, on the basis of genitals, you're missing the larger point. That identity is fluid, it's not linear, it's very large, it's across the spectrum.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
1 second, there's some network issue.
No, you're fine, go ahead. Can you hear me? Would you like to, oh sorry, we don't have her. Zainab, would you like to take that question?
Vishnu, I just wanted to add a point over here before I get into the entire sex and gender debate.
Just in 1 minute because I'm running out of time. Yeah.
Sure. Just in terms of that, when you're talking, and you are exactly right on when you're talking about sex, it's the presence of gonad, chromosomes, etc. While the entire discussion around gender is about the roles that male and female play to become man and woman in society, which is again determined by society. And I just want to refute one point made by the panel members saying that, haven't people been consulted? What are we? Are we aliens? Are we non-terrestrial life who come to the court? The fact is that no one is listening to us. The parliament is not listening to the voices of people who are even trying to present a private member bill. And it makes us, again, come back to my earlier contention that, am I a second-class citizen in this country? And an institution like marriage, which has been exclusively the domain of heterosexual people till now, whom we petitioners have challenged today, is protected by religion, by law, and by culture. So an institution like yours, which has been protected over millennia, are now getting threatened because a group of petitioners have come to court. That is the only argument that I have.
All right. Look, I'm going to have to wrap this up, but I suspect, I know that we're going to be discussing this a lot more over the days ahead. And of course, when the judgment comes out, one way or the other, these are just observations. The judgment can be very different. I'm sorry, we just haven't been able to go back to Priyanka. Her line is bad.